If you lie to someone who trusts you with their name on the deed, there is always a price, and I paid mine the moment I unlocked the front door at 3:17 p.m. I had been discharged early, still wearing the hospital wristband, keys cold in my palm. The house was quiet, but the porch light was on in broad daylight. Inside, my shoes stuck slightly to the kitchen floor, like something had spilled and dried. I set my overnight bag down and noticed the thermostat was set lower than I ever used. Upstairs, a woman laughed once short, careless. Someone had moved my wedding photo from the hallway shelf to the laundry room. Standing there, I understood that every solid thing I believed about my life was already breaking. I unlocked the front door at 3:17 p.m. One day earlier than anyone expected me to be home, and the first thing I noticed was that the porch light was on. It was still bright outside, the kind of pale afternoon sun that makes everything look flatter than it is, and Mark always complained if I forgot to turn lights off during the day. I stood there for a second with the key still in the lock, my wrist aching where the hospital band had been cut off less than an hour earlier, and told myself it didn't mean anything. The overnight bag slid off my shoulder and bumped against my knee as I stepped inside. The house smelled wrong. Not bad, just unfamiliar. Something sweet and sharp, like a candle I would never buy. I closed the door quietly out of habit, even though I was alone. Or at least, I thought I was. My shoes made a soft, sticky sound on the kitchen tile. I looked down and saw a dull patch near the sink, like something sugary had spilled and been wiped up without water. I made a mental note to clean it later, the way you do when you're tired and trying to pretend things are normal. The clock on the microwave read 3:18. It blinked once, then stayed steady. I set my bag on the chair instead of the counter, because my arms still felt weak. The discharge nurse had warned me not to lift anything heavy, had said it twice, slowly. Like she wasn't sure I was listening. I was listening. I just didn't want to stay in that hospital room another night, staring at beige walls and pretending the knot in my chest was just anxiety. Mark thought I'd be released the next morning. I'd left him a voicemail from the hallway outside radiology when my phone went straight to his mailbox. I didn't try again. I wanted the quiet of the house, the familiar shape of it. A few hours to lie down and let my body reset before he got home from work. The thermostat caught my eye as I walked past it. 68. I never set it below 72. Mark liked it cooler, said he slept better that way. But during the day, he always compromised. I reached out and bumped it up without thinking, then stopped myself and put it back. It wasn't worth an argument later. I heard something upstairs then. Not footsteps, not voices. Just a faint thump, like a drawer being closed carefully. I stood in the kitchen, one hand resting on the back of a chair, and waited. My heart started doing that uneven thing it had been doing since the night I collapsed at work, skipping and then racing, like it was trying to warn me about something my brain didn't want to name. After a few seconds, I told myself it was nothing. The house made noises. Pipes shifted. Old floorboards popped. We'd lived here long enough for me to know that. I moved down the hallway toward the stairs. As I passed the half bath, I noticed the hand towel was folded differently. Neater. Straighter. I almost laughed at myself for noticing. Being home after a hospital stay does that to you. You start cataloging details because you're trying to ground yourself. Halfway up the stairs, I heard a laugh. Just one. Soft and quick, like someone reacting to a joke under their breath. It wasn't Mark's laugh. I stopped with one foot on the next step, my fingers curling around the banister. The wood felt cool and smooth under my palm. I didn't call out. My head filled in possibilities faster than I could stop it. A neighbor? A contractor? Someone on the phone? Another sound followed. A low murmur. Male. Familiar. Mark. My stomach tightened so hard it felt like I'd been punched from the inside. I took another step up, then another, careful to keep my weight close to the wall, where the stairs didn't creak as much. We joked about that when we first moved in, about how you couldn't sneak up on anyone in this house unless you knew exactly where to step. At the top of the stairs, the hallway light was off. Sunlight from the bedroom window spilled across the carpet, cutting the hall into bright and shadowed sections. The door to our bedroom was partly closed. Not shut. Not open. Just enough to hide what was inside, if you didn't look directly at it. I didn't look right away. Instead, my eyes went to the hallway shelf, where we kept framed photos. There was an empty space. I stared at it, confused, until I realized which one was missing. Our wedding photo, the one with the cheap white frame we'd never replaced. I turned slowly and saw it propped against the wall near the laundry room, face down. That was the moment my hands started to shake. I moved closer to the bedroom door. The carpet muffled my steps. I could hear breathing now. 2 sets. One slow and steady. One lighter, faster. A woman's voice drifted through the gap. "Shouldn't we?" she started, then stopped. Mark answered her, his voice low and calm in a way I recognized too well. I leaned against the wall because the hallway tilted suddenly, like I was on a boat. My ribs ached where they'd bruised when I fell, and for a second I thought I might actually pass out right there. Slumped between the bathroom and the bedroom, invisible and ridiculous. I didn't. I stayed where I was and watched through the narrow opening in the door. I saw Mark's bare shoulder first, then his back, then a woman's arm draped across the sheets. Her nails were painted a pale pink, chipped at the tips. She reached up and touched his neck the way I used to, fingers sliding under his hair. I didn't recognize her face, but I recognized the room. Our room. The nightstand I'd dusted the week before. The lamp I'd bought on clearance because Mark said it looked clean. The quilt my mother gave us for our first anniversary, pushed back and wrinkled. Something cold settled in my chest. Not panic, not anger, just a clear, heavy understanding. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't sudden. The bed was made differently. The pillows arranged the way Mark liked when he was trying to impress someone. There was a glass of water on my side of the nightstand, condensation ring, already forming underneath it. Someone had thought ahead. I backed away from the door without making a sound. Each step felt deliberate, like I was placing my feet on marked spots. When I reached the stairs, I gripped the banister again and waited until my breathing slowed enough that I trusted myself not to collapse. I went back down the stairs, through the kitchen, and out the front door. I didn't slam it. I didn't rush. I sat on the curb with my bag at my feet and my phone in my hand, staring at the dark screen. Across the street, a man was watering his lawn, the spray hissing softly as it arced back and forth. A dog barked somewhere down the block. Everything looked exactly the same as it had that morning when the ambulance took me away. After a few minutes, the front door opened. The woman came out first. She was younger than me, dressed neatly. She adjusted her jacket as she walked, checking her phone as if this were just another stop in her day. Mark followed her onto the porch. He kissed her once, quick and familiar, then watched her walk to her car. He didn't see me sitting there. I waited until she drove away, and he went back inside before I stood up. My legs felt weak, but my head was clear. Clear in a way it hadn't been in a long time. I picked up my bag, walked back into the house, and called out, "Mark, I'm home." As I stood there, listening to his footsteps on the stairs, I knew something important had already changed. Not him. Me. And whatever I thought my life was built on had just started to come apart, piece by piece. Mark came down the stairs fast. Too fast for someone who was supposedly coming to greet his wife who'd just been released from the hospital. His face was arranged into concern before he even hit the last step, like he'd practiced it in the mirror. He opened his arms as if we were in the middle of a movie scene, and for a second my body reacted the way it always had, stepping forward automatically, letting him pull me in. He smelled like soap and something sweet that wasn't mine. He said into my hair, "You're home." I thought they were keeping you until tomorrow. They cleared me, I said, keeping my voice light. My throat felt tight, but I made the words come out smooth. My labs looked good. The doctor didn't see a reason to keep me another night. His hands moved over my shoulders, down to my upper arms, checking me like I was fragile glass. "Tired," I said. "Mostly just tired." Arcole. He kissed my forehead, then stepped back and looked at me the way he used to when we were dating, like I was something he was lucky to have. If I hadn't been standing in that hallway less than 10 minutes earlier, listening to him say, "She's not home," I might have believed him. I might have let the relief of being home soften the edges of the last few weeks, but I had seen enough to know the concern in his eyes was a performance, and Mark was very good at performing. "Let me get your bag," he said, reaching for it. "It's fine," I said quickly, and pulled it a little closer to my leg. The bag wasn't heavy. It was just mine. His gaze flicked toward the staircase, and it lasted half a second, but it was there. Like he was checking whether the hallway was clear, whether everything looked normal. Like he was counting time. "You should sit," he said. "Seriously, the discharge instructions." "I know." I started toward the living room and lowered myself onto the couch carefully. My body still felt bruised, like I'd been shaken hard and hadn't settled back into place. Mark hovered for a moment, then walked into the kitchen, opening and closing drawers too loudly. "I can make you something," he called. "Soup? Toast? I can order from that place you like." "Whatever's easy," I said, because it didn't matter. Nothing in this house mattered the way it had yesterday. He came back with a glass of water and set it on the coffee table in front of me. His hands looked steady now. That steadiness made me feel sicker than any pain medication. "How was it?" he asked, sitting on the edge of the armchair. "The hospital. Were they nice to you?" "They were fine," I said. I stared at the water. The light from the window cut across the surface, making it shimmer. "They ran a lot of tests." He nodded like he was absorbing it. "I hated leaving you there." The lie sat between us, solid and quiet. I didn't call it out. I didn't let my face change. I nodded back, like I believed him, like I was still the version of me who took his words at face value. "Your sister called?" he said. "I told her you were resting." My sister, Megan, lived 3 states away and had been texting me nonstop since I landed in the hospital. Megan was the kind of person who asked too many questions, pushed too hard, and never let things go once she caught a scent of trouble. Mark didn't like her. He said she was dramatic. Megan said he was slippery, and she'd used that word years ago, before we were even married, when she watched him smile at my parents over dinner and then roll his eyes the second they walked away. "She'll be happy I'm home," I said. "Yeah," Mark said, and he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We can call her later." Later. Always later with Mark. That was one of his favorite tricks. Delay the moment, smooth it over, keep moving. By the time you circled back, the urgency was gone and you were tired and you let it drop. I watched him talk for a few minutes. He asked about my pain level, if I needed my prescription filled, if I'd eaten anything. He said all the right things. He even reached out and brushed my hair back like he used to when we were newlyweds, and still touched each other for no reason. 5 years ago, I thought I'd gotten lucky. Mark was steady. Mark was charming without being flashy. Mark shook hands firmly, remembered names, held doors for older women in grocery store aisles. People liked him instantly. He was the kind of man your friends approved of, and your mom relaxed around. When I brought him to Thanksgiving for the first time, my dad slapped him on the shoulder and said, "You seem like a good one. I'll do right by her." I believed him so completely, I felt embarrassed at how easily it came. We met at a charity fundraiser downtown. I worked in compliance for a state agency then, the kind of job people never understand until they need it. My day was spreadsheets, audits, reports that had to be right, because public money wasn't a suggestion, it was responsibility. Mark was on the other side of that world, managing projects for a construction firm that bid on public contracts. He talked about timelines and permits and budgets like he enjoyed the puzzle of it. He told me he liked that my work mattered, that I had a spine, that I didn't let people get away with shortcuts. That was the first time he ever praised my instincts. After we married, he kept praising them, but only when they benefited him. When my caution made his life harder, he'd call it anxiety. When my questions got too direct, he'd kiss me and say, "I worried too much." When I asked for details, he'd say, "Em, you don't have to run the whole world." I'd laughed at that. I'd thought it was affection. We bought the house 2 years into the marriage, a simple place in a neighborhood where people raked their leaves and waved at each other and pretended they didn't notice who came and went. The mortgage was reasonable. The yard was small. The kitchen had cheap cabinets and a window over the sink. We were proud of it anyway. Mark liked to say we were building something real. The rental property came later. It wasn't even supposed to be a thing. My aunt passed away unexpectedly and left me her little cabin outside town, tucked near a lake. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and quiet, and it had been paid off decades ago. I wanted to keep it as a place for family, a place Megan could bring her kids when they visited. Mark saw it differently the second he walked through the front door. He started talking about cash flow and passive income, like he'd been waiting his whole life for an opportunity to say those words out loud. "We can fix it up," he'd said. "Make it a short-term rental. People pay crazy money for lake weekends." I'd hesitated. I didn't like strangers in my aunt's place. I didn't like the idea of turning her quiet little cabin into a business. But Mark was persuasive, and he framed it as smart, responsible, a way to create a cushion for us. a way to be safer. So I agreed, with conditions. We'd keep the place in my name. We'd use a separate account for the income and expenses. We'd be transparent. No weirdness. Mark had laughed and kissed my cheek. You and your rules, he'd said, like it was cute. Then he took over everything. The listings, the cleaning service, the bookings, the little renovations. He said I had enough on my plate with work. He said he was better at hospitality. He said he liked being the one who handled it. I let him. That was my mistake. Not trusting him, exactly. Letting him make it easy for me not to look too closely. When I collapsed at my desk 3 weeks earlier, it didn't feel dramatic. It felt like my body had finally run out of battery without warning. 1 minute I was reading an email about an inspection discrepancy. The next minute, the room tilted and went dark around the edges. My supervisor called 911. Someone put a jacket under my head. I heard my own breathing, loud and strange. And then I woke up under fluorescent lights with a nurse telling me to squeeze her fingers. They said it was a combination of dehydration, exhaustion, and a stress response that had triggered a fainting episode. Nothing life-threatening. Still serious. Still enough to keep me overnight, then another night when my heart rate stayed weird, then another when they decided to run one more set of scans, just to be safe. Mark had been there every day. Flowers, text messages, sweet talk. He'd held my hand and told me he was scared. He'd told me the house felt empty without me. He'd told me he couldn't wait to have me back. All of that had been happening while he was bringing another woman into our bedroom and saying, "She's not home," like I was a schedule detail and not his wife. I looked at him now, sitting in our living room, playing devoted husband. I watched his knee bounce lightly, the way it did when he was nervous. I watched him glance toward his phone on the coffee table like he was waiting for a message he didn't want me to see. "Do you want to lie down?" he asked. "I can get you settled." "In a minute," I said. He stood up anyway. "I'll order dinner. Something easy. You just rest." He walked into the kitchen, and I heard his phone buzz once. He stopped moving for a split second, then kept going, like nothing happened. I stared at the spot on the hallway shelf where our wedding photo was supposed to be. I could still see the outline of dust where it had sat. In my head, I replayed that calm, low voice upstairs and the way the woman laughed, careless and comfortable in my home. I didn't feel like screaming. I didn't feel like crying. I felt like something in me had clicked into place. The part of me that knew how to follow a trail without leaving one. How to document without being noticed. How to wait until the timing was right. Mark thought he'd gotten away with it because I was tired, because I was gentle, because I'd been the kind of wife who believed the best version of him was the real one. He thought I would fall apart if I found out. I lifted the glass of water and took a slow sip, even though my mouth was dry and my stomach turned. In the kitchen, Mark started talking to someone on the phone. Voice bright, casual, like a man with nothing to hide. I sat there and let him think that. Because I wasn't going to confront him without proof. Not just of the woman, of everything else he'd been doing while I lay in a hospital bed, trusting him with my name, my home, and a property that wasn't supposed to be anyone's playground. And as he laughed softly into the phone, I made a quiet decision that would change the rest of our lives. I was going to find out what he'd been using my cabin for, and I was going to make sure he paid for it in a way he couldn't charm his way out of. That night, I let Mark tuck me into bed like I was still fragile enough to be handled. He dimmed the lights, pulled the comforter up carefully, and kissed my temple with the kind of tenderness that used to melt me. I stared at the ceiling fan turning slowly and kept my breathing even. When he slid in beside me, his body warm and familiar, I felt my skin tighten in a way I couldn't control, like my nerves were pulling back from him. "You need anything?" he whispered. "No," I said. "Just sleep." He put an arm over my waist and held me there, protective, possessive, like he was reassuring himself more than me. His hand settled on my stomach and stayed still. Within minutes, his breathing changed, deepened, and he fell asleep fast. Mark had always been able to sleep when things were unresolved. It was one of the things that made me trust him once. It was also the thing that made me realize, now, how much he could compartmentalize. I didn't sleep. I lay there until the clock on the nightstand clicked over to midnight, then 1, then 2. The house made its usual quiet sounds. Pipes expanding, the fridge humming, a car passing on the street outside. Every noise felt louder because my mind refused to settle. I kept seeing the sliver of the bedroom door, The pale pink nails, the way Mark's voice had sounded when he said she wasn't home, like he was talking about a package delivery. At around 3 in the morning, I slid out from under his arm and walked to the bathroom. I didn't turn on the overhead light. I used the nightlight and splashed cold water on my face. My eyes looked wrong in the mirror. Not red, not swollen, just wide and flat, like I was watching someone else's life. I stood there and made myself a promise I could keep. I would act normal until I knew exactly what I was dealing with. The next morning, Mark woke up cheerful, like the night before had been ordinary. He brought me coffee in bed and asked if the pain meds were helping. He said he'd taken the day off work, just in case, and I forced myself to smile like it was romantic instead of suspicious. "You don't have to babysit me," I said. "I'm not babysitting," he said, and kissed my knuckles. "I just want you to get better." He moved through the house with a kind of careful energy, doing little tasks he rarely did. Loading the dishwasher, wiping down counters, tossing a load of laundry in the washer. It almost looked like guilt. Or it almost looked like control. Like he was cleaning up traces. Around 10, he said he needed to run to the hardware store. "We're low on filters," he said. "And I want to grab a few things for the cabin." "The cabin," I repeated, keeping my voice neutral. He nodded, too quickly. "Just small stuff. I'll be back in an hour." And I watched him put on his jacket and check his phone before he walked out the door. He didn't kiss me goodbye the way he usually did. He touched my shoulder. Like that was enough. When his car backed out of the driveway and turned the corner, I waited for the sound to fade before I stood up. My body still felt weak, but my head was sharp. I moved slowly. Not because I was afraid of getting caught, but because the last thing I needed was to overdo it and end up back in a hospital bed while Mark played hero again. I started with the obvious. The hallway shelf. I picked up our wedding photo from the laundry room, turned it over, and stared at it. Mark's smile, wide and bright. My own face, softer than it looked now. My cheek pressed into his. I set it back on the shelf and brushed my fingers across the dust outline it had left. Something about seeing it moved and turned face down made my chest tighten again. It wasn't just the affair. It was the disrespect, the casualness, the way he'd made room for her by moving evidence of me. I walked into his home office. It used to be a guest room before we decided we didn't need guests as much as we needed extra income. Mark added a desk, a second monitor, and a lock on the drawer where he kept paperwork. He'd once told me it was professional. I'd believed him. His laptop wasn't on the desk. He'd taken it with him, but his iPad was there, propped on a stand, plugged into a charger. Mark was the kind of person who had multiple devices because he liked redundancy. He also had terrible habits about passwords because he thought being careful was something that happened to other people. I picked up the iPad and hit the home button. It lit up and asked for a passcode. I didn't guess wildly. I thought about Mark the way you think about a problem you've solved before. His birthday didn't work. Our anniversary didn't work. I tried the address number of the cabin. The one I'd memorized years ago because it was my aunt's. The screen unlocked. My stomach flipped. Not because it worked, but because it told me he thought of the cabin as his, too. I didn't open his messages. Not yet. That felt too messy. Too easy to get pulled into emotions. Instead, I went to his email and searched one word: cabin. The results loaded fast. There were threads with cleaners, with guests, with supply orders, with a co-host account on the rental platform. I tapped one message and saw a name in the signature line that didn't belong to any cleaner I knew. Lauren Pierce. I read carefully, scrolling slowly so I didn't miss anything. The email wasn't romantic. It was businesslike, brisk. She was confirming check-in times, asking about keypad codes, suggesting a new pricing strategy for summer weekends. Mark responded in the same tone. Efficient, familiar, like they'd been coordinating for a while. I searched her name in his email and found more. A lot more. There were invoices attached with a logo for a company called Pierce, Staging, and Design. There were payment confirmations. There were notes about refreshing the listing and upgrading the guest experience. There was a message that made my blood go cold because it was so casual. Don't worry, she won't notice. I'll handle it. He hadn't written my name. I took a screenshot and emailed it to myself from my work account, then deleted the sent message from his device. My fingers didn't shake. That surprised me. What shook was my sense of how long he'd been doing this without me noticing. I kept digging. Mark had a folder labeled Cabin 2025. Inside were spreadsheets, monthly revenue, expenses, occupancy rates. I opened the most recent one and stared at the numbers. The income was higher than I expected. Much higher. Which should have been good news. The cabin was mine, on paper. The account was supposed to be separate. This was supposed to be something we did together, transparently. But the expense column was wrong. There were line items that didn't make sense. Renovation materials, in months when no renovations happened. Emergency plumber, twice in 1 week, with no notes. Security upgrade, with a large amount next to it. There was also a recurring payment labeled Marketing LP for $500 every month. Lauren Pierce. I copied the spreadsheet to a cloud drive Mark didn't use, and then put the iPad back exactly where I found it. The charging cable aligned the way it had been. I stood still for a moment and listened to the house. Nothing, just silence and the hum of the refrigerator. I walked into the kitchen and opened the drawer where we kept mail. There were envelopes from the county tax assessor. There were flyers. There was a letter from our bank about a change in terms for one of our accounts. Mark must have meant to hide it because it was tucked under a stack of grocery coupons. I slid it out and opened it. It was a notice that our joint account had been linked to a new external transfer profile. Not a deposit, not an automatic bill pay. A transfer profile, the kind you use when you move money out in chunks. There was an email address listed under the authorization information. It wasn't mine. It wasn't Mark's main email either. It was a Gmail account I didn't recognize. My hands finally started to tremble. I sat down at the kitchen table and forced myself to breathe slowly through my nose. In. Out. In. Out. My body wanted to go to anger, to panic, to the urge to call Mark right then and demand answers. I let that urge pass like a wave. If I confronted him now, he'd turn it into an argument about my health, my stress, my paranoia. He'd cry. He'd apologize. He'd distract. He'd delete whatever he could delete. And then I'd never know the full truth. I needed to know what he was moving money for. And why. I pulled up my own laptop and logged into the rental platform account using my email, the original account I created when the cabin first went live. I hadn't checked it in months because Mark always said he was on top of it. My hands were steadier now because I was doing something I understood. Auditing. The dashboard loaded, and the first thing I saw was that I wasn't listed as the primary host anymore. I stared at the screen and blinked hard, thinking I was reading it wrong. But it was clear. There was a co-host with full privileges. The name attached to that co-host role was Lauren Pierce. Mark hadn't just been cheating. He'd handed control of my aunt's cabin, my property, my inheritance, the one thing in this marriage that had been unquestionably mine to another woman. And then I saw the message thread labeled, Guest Incident, Do Not Mention. I clicked it. The conversation was between Mark and Lauren. It was short, blunt. Lauren. Mark. There is no camera. It's a smoke detector. Tell them that. Lauren. They're not stupid. Mark. Refund one night and shut them up. My throat went dry. I stared at that screen until my eyes hurt, reading the lines again and again. Camera. Smoke detector. Refund. Shut them up. I didn't know what the camera was for yet. I didn't know where it was, or what it captured, or how long it had been there. But I knew one thing, with complete clarity. Sitting alone at my kitchen table, while my husband was out buying filters. Mark had turned my property into something I didn't recognize. He'd brought another woman into my marriage and into my business and into my name. And whatever he'd been hiding at that cabin wasn't just betrayal. It was the kind of secret that could ruin people. When I heard his car pull into the driveway, I closed my laptop gently and placed my hands flat on the table until the shaking stopped. I stood up, walked to the sink, and ran water like I'd been doing nothing more than rinsing a cup. Mark walked in, holding a bag from the hardware store, and smiled at me like a man who thought he was still in control. Hey, he said. How are you feeling? I turned and gave him the soft, trusting look he expected, the one I'd practiced for years without knowing it was practice. Better, I said. I'm glad you're here. Asked. And as he set the bag on the counter and started talking about the cabin like it belonged to him, I realized something else. Something that made my stomach settle into a cold, steady calm. He wasn't going to stop. So I was going to make him. Mark spent the rest of that afternoon hovering in the house, making noise in the kitchen, checking on me every half hour like a man trying to prove he wasn't guilty of anything. He replaced an air filter we didn't need replaced. He wiped down the counters twice. He asked if I wanted to watch a movie, then scrolled through options without actually picking one. Every time his phone buzzed, he flipped it face down with a practiced motion that he probably thought I'd never notice. I noticed everything. At dinner, he ordered takeout from the Thai place he knew I liked, like a peace offering. He placed the containers on the table and leaned in to kiss me, and I let him because pulling away would have raised questions. He talked about work like he always did, the same vague complaints about subcontractors and timelines. He mentioned the cabin twice, casual, like it was just another item on his mental list. "I'm thinking we should raise the weekend rate," he said, twirling noodles around his fork. "Summer's coming. Demand's going to spike. We should talk about it," I said. "We can," he said quickly. "I've just been watching the market. I've got it handled." I watched his eyes when he said handled. There was a tiny flare of irritation behind them, like he didn't like the idea that I was asking questions about something he considered his territory now. After dinner, he took the trash out, then stood at the sink and washed containers that were meant to be thrown away. He was making a show of being helpful. He was also killing time. "Do you want me to call Megan?" he asked suddenly, rinsing his hands. "No," I said. He nodded, relieved. "Good. You should sleep. I'll set an alarm and take my call in the other room if I have to." My call, like I was a delicate project. That night, I let him fall asleep first. When his breathing deepened, I rolled onto my side, facing away from him, and stared at the dim outline of the bedroom door. I kept thinking about that message thread. Guest incident do not mention, and the word camera sitting there like a weight. By 6 the next morning, Mark was up and dressed like he was going to the office. He kissed my cheek and said he had to run in for a few hours because a client was anxious about a permit. He promised he'd be home by lunchtime. "I'll be fine," I said, and I made my voice soft. "Drive safe." He squeezed my shoulder. "Text me if you need anything." As soon as he left, I did the opposite of resting. I started with something small and harmless looking. I called the cleaning service, listed on the rental account, the one Mark had set up. A woman answered on the second ring. "Lakeview Turnovers," she said. "This is Rita." "Hi," I said. "This is Emily Carter. I own the cabin on Larkspur Lane. I just had a quick question." There was a pause, the kind of pause that happens when a person realizes they're talking to someone they haven't been talking to. "Oh," she said carefully. "I'm updating some paperwork," I said, keeping my tone calm and ordinary. "I wanted to confirm the schedule for this week. Do we have guests checking in?" Rita hesitated again. "I usually coordinate with Mark." "I know," I said. "I'm just taking a look because I've been out of commission." "Hospital. Long story." Her voice softened. "Oh, honey, I'm sorry." "Thank you," I said. "So, what's the schedule?" She cleared her throat. "There's a checkout today at 11, then a check-in Friday afternoon. And you'll be there today?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "Great," I said. "If I stop by to pick something up, is that going to be an issue?" Another pause. This one had a different feel. Not confusion. Caution. I don't know. "It's my property," I said, still pleasant. "I just want to grab a box from the closet. I won't be in your way." "All right," she said slowly. After I hung up, I stood at the kitchen counter and looked at my car keys. The doctor had told me not to drive for a week. My body still felt bruised and tired. But the idea of sitting in this house, waiting for Mark to come home and keep lying to my face, made me feel worse than the faintness ever had. I drove carefully, slowly, windows cracked open for air. The cabin was about 40 minutes away, out past the last stretch of chain restaurants and big box stores, down a 2-lane road that cut through pine and scrub. I'd always liked the drive. It felt like leaving the noise behind. That morning, it felt like heading toward a crime scene. When I turned onto Larkspur Lane, I saw a black SUV parked in the gravel driveway. Not Rita's car. Something newer and more expensive. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. I kept moving, slowing as I passed, and glanced through the windshield. The SUV's windows were tinted, but I could see a silhouette in the driver's seat, someone looking down at a phone. I drove past the cabin and parked farther down the lane near a patch of trees. My heart was pounding in a dull, steady way. I sat for a moment and stared at my hands. They were shaking again. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. It could be a guest leaving. It could be a neighbor. It could be nothing. Then I watched the cabin's front door open. A woman stepped out carrying a tan tote bag. Her hair was pulled into a neat ponytail. She wore a fitted jacket and light jeans. The kind of outfit that looks effortless but is actually planned. She locked the door using the keypad on the handle, then walked straight to the SUV and climbed in. Even from that distance, I recognized her. Lauren Pierce. She backed out of the driveway smoothly and drove away without looking down the lane. When the sound of her engine faded, I sat there for another full minute, breathing slowly, letting the reality settle. She had a code. She had access. She had been inside the cabin this morning, before the cleaner arrived, like she owned it. I waited until I saw Rita's small sedan pull into the driveway. When she got out with a bucket and a tote of supplies, I started my car again and drove up behind her, parking as if I belonged there. Because I did. Rita looked up when I stepped out. Her face tightened at first, then shifted into something like relief. "Oh," she said softly. "You came. Just for a minute," I said. "I won't get in your way." Rita nodded and unlocked the door with a key from her ring. Mark usually has us use the keypad, but I don't like those. Too many people know the numbers. I stepped inside and the smell hit me immediately. The same sweet, sharp scent as my house. A vanilla candle on the kitchen counter, half burned. "I don't remember that," I said. Rita shrugged. "Lauren brings stuff. Says it makes it feel branded." Branded. Like this wasn't my aunt's quiet cabin anymore. Like it was a product. I walked through the living room slowly. The furniture had been rearranged. A new rug lay under the coffee table, beige and expensive looking. The framed photos of the lake that used to hang crookedly were gone, replaced by sleek prints with generic quotes about escape and breathe. "What happened to the pictures?" I asked. Rita's mouth tightened. "They said guests wanted something more modern." They said. "Not Mark, not us, they." I moved down the hall to the small bedroom closet, where we used to store extra linens and old board games. The door stuck slightly, the way it always had. When I pulled it open, I saw plastic bins stacked neatly and labeled with a label maker. Towels, linens, amenities. It looked like a staged rental, not a family place. On the top shelf, pushed behind a bin, was a small black case I'd never seen before. I pulled it down and unzipped it. Inside was a compact device with a blinking light, along with a bundle of cords. My throat went dry again. I didn't say the word camera out loud. I didn't need to. I zipped the case back up, slid it into my tote bag, and kept my face neutral. If Rita noticed anything, she didn't react, but her eyes followed me like she was trying to decide whether to say something. "Rita," I said quietly, turning back toward her. "Have there been—" Rita hesitated, then lowered her voice. "There was that one couple last month. They said they felt like someone had been in here, like things were moved. They asked about the smoke detector in the living room." "Why?" I asked. Rita looked toward the ceiling without lifting her head. "Because it's not the one that used to be there. It's new. Bigger." I felt my stomach twist. "Did Mark handle it?" I asked. Rita nodded. Lauren did too. She told me not to mention it again. Said it made the guests paranoid. I forced myself to nod like that explanation made sense. "Okay," I said. "Thank you." I walked into the living room and looked up. The smoke detector near the corner looked different. Exactly like Rita had said, slightly larger, slightly newer, angled in a way that wasn't natural. My skin prickled. I didn't reach up and touch it. I didn't want to leave fingerprints. I didn't want to alert anyone that I'd noticed. Instead, I took out my phone and snapped a picture of the ceiling like I was photographing the decor. Then I took another, closer, catching the brand name stamped on the side. I walked into the kitchen and opened the cabinet where my aunt used to keep a tin of spare keys. The tin was gone. In its place was a locked metal cash box. I stared at it, then looked at Rita. "Is that new?" Rita's lips pressed together. "Lauren put it there." "For what?" I asked. "Extra cash from guests," Rita said, uncomfortable now. "Sometimes people leave tips. Sometimes they pay for late checkout." "And where does it go?" I asked. Rita swallowed. "Mark told me to leave it." I nodded slowly. I didn't blame Rita. People like Mark always made their messes other people's problem. I stayed long enough to look through the guest log on the counter, the one Mark claimed he didn't use anymore because everything's digital. It wasn't a log. It was a clipboard with printed forms, names, phone numbers, sometimes even copies of IDs attached in a little pocket sleeve. My pulse hammered in my ears. I took photos of the forms without flipping through every page. I didn't want to make it obvious. I didn't want to get greedy. I'd already taken something from that closet that might be enough to change everything. When I left the cabin, the sunlight felt too bright. My body felt heavy, but my mind was moving fast. I sat in my car with the tote bag on the passenger seat and stared at it like it was alive. Mark hadn't just betrayed me with Lauren. Together, they'd been using my property to collect things that didn't belong to them. Money, personal information, maybe worse. And they'd been doing it under my name, tied to my deed, my inheritance, my identity. I drove home carefully, my hands tight on the wheel. By the time Mark walked through the front door at 12:13 p.m., smiling and carrying a sandwich like he'd been working all morning, I was already back on the couch with a blanket over my legs and my phone in my hand like I'd been scrolling aimlessly. He leaned down and kissed my forehead. "How are you holding up?" I looked up at him with the same soft expression he expected, the one that told him I was still the wife he could manage. "I'm okay," I said. "Just resting." He nodded, relieved, and walked into the kitchen, completely unaware that in a tote bag hidden behind the laundry room hamper, I was holding the first solid piece of proof that the cabin wasn't just an Airbnb. It was a trap they'd built, and now I knew exactly where to start pulling it apart. Mark ate his sandwich standing at the counter, scrolling through his phone between bites like he couldn't sit still long enough to be a husband for more than a few minutes. He asked if I'd taken my meds. He reminded me to drink water. He told me about a meeting that ran long. I nodded at the right places and watched him the way you watch someone you don't recognize anymore, cataloging habits and tells. When his phone buzzed, he glanced at the screen and angled it away from me without thinking. His mouth tightened for a second. Then, he looked up and smiled. "Work," he said, like the word explained everything. "Of course," I said. He rinsed his hands and leaned against the counter. "I was thinking," he said casually, "maybe we should talk about the cabin account, just to make sure everything's organized if you're going to be resting for a while." "It's dead H2. My stomach stayed calm, but my thoughts sharpened. "What about it?" "Nothing big," he said, lifting one shoulder. "Just maybe we streamline. I've been moving money back and forth to cover supplies. It's been a little messy." Streamline. The same word he used when he wanted to take something away and make it sound like a favor. "I can look at it," I said. "It's my account." He laughed lightly. "It's ours. But sure, whenever you feel up to it." I watched him closely. His smile didn't change, but there was tension in his jaw, like he'd bumped into a limit. Mark was used to me letting him handle things. He liked that version of me. He relied on it. "You should rest," he said, pushing off the counter. "I've got an afternoon call. I'll take it in the office." He disappeared into his home office and closed the door almost all the way, leaving it cracked just enough to feel normal. The second he did, I stood up and walked to the laundry room with steady steps, like I was just moving around the house. Behind the hamper, under a stack of old towels, my tote bag waited. I pulled it out and unzipped it. Careful, quiet. The black case sat inside, still zipped. I set it on the counter and stared at it for a long second. The way you stare at something you don't want to admit is real. Then I opened it. The device was small, matte black, with a lens the size of a pencil eraser. There were cords, a micro SD card, and an instruction manual folded in half. The brand name on the manual matched the one stamped on the smoke detector in the cabin. A consumer-grade hidden camera system. The kind people buy online to spy on a nanny or catch a porch thief. The kind of thing that felt illegal the second you imagined. It pointed at a bed. I forced myself not to think about where it had been aimed. Instead, I took pictures. The manual, the model number, the serial sticker, the micro SD card slot, everything that could prove what it was. Then I put it back and zipped the case up again. I didn't plug it in. I didn't turn it on. I didn't need to. The existence of it was enough, and the fact that it was in my cabin meant it was in my name, on my property, tied to my address. I went back to the living room and sat down like I'd never moved. My pulse was steady. That steadiness scared me a little, but it also felt like a rope I could hold on to. Mark's voice drifted from the office. low and friendly. He was on a call. He sounded relaxed, like a man with no consequences. I waited until the call ended. I heard his chair scrape. Then, the office door opened, and he walked out with his phone in his hand, thumb tapping. "I'm going to run an errand," he said. "Just quick." "What kind of errand?" I asked, keeping it light. He didn't look at me. He was gone in less than 2 minutes. The second his car pulled away, I stood up and went straight to his office. I didn't hesitate. I didn't look around. I walked to his desk and opened the drawer that had a small lock on it. It wasn't locked. That made my stomach twist again. A lock on a drawer that's never locked is not for security. It's for symbolism. It's to make you feel like you're crossing a line if you open it. Inside were folders, receipts, a spare set of keys, and a small notebook with a leather cover. I lifted it out and flipped it open. It wasn't a diary. It was a list. Names, dates, amounts, and short notes, written in Mark's quick handwriting. 6, over 14, late checkout, $200 cash. 6, sobre 22. Extra guest, $150. 7/3, lost key fee, $75. 7 over 18, damage deposit kept $300. She didn't fight. I stared at the page and felt something cold move through me. These weren't normal fees. These were opportunistic grabs, the kind of petty theft you justify by calling it business. And the notes weren't just about money. There were other entries: ID photo, passport copy, CC scan. I flipped forward and found a page with 4-digit codes written down, repeated with different dates. Keypad codes. Mark and Lauren weren't just hosting guests. They were collecting information. They were storing it, keeping it, using it. I set the notebook down and opened the folder beneath it. Inside were printed copies of the guest forms I'd photographed at the cabin, but these were organized, tabbed. Some had handwritten notes clipped to them. Works at, out of town, drinks a lot, traveling alone. I felt my throat tighten. It wasn't just theft. It was predatory. It was people being watched and cataloged like targets. On the bottom of the stack was a sheet of paper with a title printed at the top: Pierce Staging and Design Client Intake. It listed services, fees, and a percentage cut for co-host revenue optimization. Mark's name was on the second page. Not as a client, but as a partner. I took my phone out and photographed every page. I didn't remove the papers. I didn't change the order. I didn't leave a trace. Then I slid the notebook and folder back exactly as they'd been and closed the drawer. My hands were shaking now, but my head stayed clear. I sat back at his desk and looked at the 2 monitors. The screens were asleep. Mark's laptop wasn't there. But the desktop computer was, the one he used for cabin stuff because he said it was easier to manage listings on a big screen. I moved the mouse, and the login screen lit up. Password required. I didn't guess randomly. I didn't have to. Mark had already shown me his habits. I tried the cabin address number again with our anniversary at the end. It didn't work. I tried our dog's name with a number. No. I tried Lauren's last name, Pierce, with 25 at the end. The desktop unlocked. For a second, I just stared. I felt like I'd been slapped and kissed at the same time. That he would use her name as a password on a computer in our house was a kind of arrogance I hadn't seen before. Or maybe I had seen it and I just called it confidence because that was easier. I opened the browser. There were tabs already there, minimized. A banking portal. A rental platform dashboard. A Gmail inbox that wasn't his main account. I clicked the Gmail tab. The inbox loaded. The subject lines hit me like a series of small punches. New transfer confirmation. Payment received Pierce Design. Chargeback dispute. Guest complaint we felt watched. Ray. Security device placement. Do not refund hold line. My vision sharpened. I opened the email about the complaint. It was from a woman who'd stayed at the cabin with her teenage daughter. She wrote in plain language, polite but firm, saying something felt off, that the smoke detector in the living room looked different, and that her daughter had been uncomfortable changing clothes in the bedroom. Mark's reply was smooth and professional. He apologized, said the device was only a smoke detector, offered a partial refund, and suggested they were misinterpreting standard safety equipment. He ended the email by saying he'd be happy to cancel future reservations for them if they were anxious travelers. Anxious travelers. Like the problem was their minds, not his device. I scrolled down and saw Lauren had replied to Mark in the same thread, but not to the guest. Her message was shorter. Too close. Move it. Bedroom is better anyway. Living room gets questioned. My stomach dropped hard enough that I had to grip the edge of the desk. Bedroom is better anyway. I swallowed. My mouth tasted metallic, like fear. I wanted to slam the laptop shut. I wanted to throw up. I wanted to walk outside and scream into the empty street. I didn't do any of those things. I took pictures of the screen. I took a picture of the date and time. I took pictures of the full thread so it couldn't be dismissed as a screenshot taken out of context. Then I opened the next email. It was from a payment processor. Warning of suspicious activity on a linked account. There were transfer confirmations to a Pierce staging account, and then transfers out to another account under a different name. The amounts were not huge individually, but they were steady, consistent, designed not to raise flags. I clicked the linked account details and saw something that made my skin go cold again. The name on the destination account wasn't Mark's. It wasn't Lauren's either. It was mine, Emily Carter. My address. My social security number masked except for the last 4 digits. Correct. Mark had set up transfers using my identity. My hands went numb. I stared at the screen and felt like the room had shifted slightly, like the floor wasn't where I thought it was. He hadn't just been using my property. He'd been using my name like a tool, a shield, a weapon. If any of this got reported, if anyone complained to the platform or to the police, the paperwork would point to me first. The cabin was mine. The account was mine. The identity was mine. Mark would step back and say he was helping manage. And Lauren would disappear, and I would be the one left holding a device that never should have been inside a smoke detector. I heard my own breathing, fast and shallow, and forced it to slow down. This wasn't just a marriage problem anymore. This was my life, my job, my reputation, my freedom. I worked in compliance. If my name got attached to surveillance and identity misuse, I could lose everything I'd built. Mark knew that. He knew exactly what it would cost me, and he still did it. I logged out of the email, closed the browser tabs, and put the computer back to sleep. I stood up and walked out of the office, shutting the door the way I'd found it, leaving everything exactly as it was. I went into the kitchen, filled a glass of water, and drank it slowly. My hands were still trembling, but my mind was already moving into a different mode, the one that felt like work, like procedure. Document, preserve, sequence, protect yourself first. Mark came home 20 minutes later with a small bag and a smile that didn't match the heat in my chest. "Got the thing for the cabin," he said, holding up a new smoke detector in its packaging like it was innocent. I looked at it, then at him. I smiled back. "That's great," I said. He set the bag on the counter and walked toward me like he was going to kiss me. I let him, because I knew now that what I was planning wasn't a confrontation. It wasn't an argument. It wasn't even revenge in the way people imagine revenge. It was an extraction, and I was going to pull my name out of his mess and leave him buried in it. That night, Mark tried to be gentle again, like tenderness could erase what he'd done. He kept asking if the drive home from the hospital had been hard, if my head felt clear, if I wanted him to rub my shoulders. I let him hover and fuss because the version of Mark who played caretaker was the safest version to keep close. Caretaker Mark was distracted by his own performance. He wasn't looking for cracks. After dinner, he went upstairs to take a shower. I heard the water start, then the muffled sound of him humming, the same tune he always hummed when he thought everything was fine. I stood at the kitchen sink, hands in the soapy water, and watched my reflection in the window glass. My face looked calm. My eyes didn't. They looked like someone had turned a light on behind them. I dried my hands, walked into the laundry room, and pulled the tote bag out again. The black case felt heavier than it should have. Not in weight, in meaning. I set it down on top of the washer and stared at it until my breathing slowed. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote a list. Not a dramatic list. Not a list of feelings. A list of facts. The kind of list I would make at work when something wasn't lining up, and I needed to build a case that couldn't be argued away. Cabin in my name. Lauren has keypad access. Guest intake forms, printed and stored. Hidden camera device present. Emails confirm moving device to bedroom. Transfers in my name. Separate Gmail account. Notebook with cash and ID notes. I stared at the last line and felt my stomach tighten again. Emails confirm moving device to bedroom. I couldn't let myself think about people undressing in a place they rented for peace. A place that used to be my aunt's retreat turned into something dirty and predatory. If I let my mind go there, I'd lose control. Control was the only thing keeping me upright. Mark came downstairs in sweatpants, towel around his neck, hair damp. He looked relaxed. He looked like a man who believed his life was stable. He sat beside me on the couch and pulled me in like he owned the right to comfort me. "You're quiet," he said. "I'm tired," I said, and rested my head against his shoulder because it was easier than resisting. He kissed the top of my head. "I'm going to fix the cabin stuff," he said. "Just one more push, and it'll run like a machine all summer. Then, we can actually enjoy it." We. The word almost made me laugh. I murmured, and closed my eyes like I was drifting off. When he finally went to bed, I waited until the house was fully still. No footsteps, no shifting sheets, no phone buzz. Then I slid out of bed and moved through the dark hallway with my phone flashlight turned low, angled toward the floor. I went back into his office. This time I didn't go for the drawer. I went straight to the desktop computer because I knew what was there, and I knew the longer it stayed there, the more time Mark had to clean it up. People like him always thought they had time until they didn't. I woke the screen and typed the password again. Pierce25. The cursor blinked once, then the desktop loaded. I didn't open emails first. I opened the File Explorer and searched for anything with Lauren's name. Dozens of documents appeared. PDFs, spreadsheets, scanned IDs, a folder labeled Intake, another labeled Incidents, another labeled Payments. My hands started shaking again. But I kept moving. In Incidents, there were complaint logs that never went to the rental platform. Mark and Lauren had been tracking issues privately, people who questioned the smoke detector, people who asked about the keypad logs, people who requested refunds. Next to each entry was a note: deflect, refund, partial, deny, block future, A2. In Intake, there were scanned copies of driver's licenses and passports. Not all guests, but enough to make my skin prickle. Some were labeled with little tags: good credit, corporate, solo, new phone. I scrolled through, heart pounding, and found something that made my breath catch. A folder labeled Card 2. Next, inside were screenshots of payment confirmations and partial credit card numbers, along with photos of cards held in someone's hand, the way you'd photograph a card for a deposit and then pretend you deleted it. I sat back in the chair and felt heat rise behind my eyes. Not tears, anger. The kind of anger that makes your body feel too small for your bones. I reached for my phone and started taking pictures of the screen, but then I stopped. Pictures were better than nothing, but they weren't enough. Screenshots could be questioned. Photos could be dismissed. I needed files. I found a USB drive in Mark's desk drawer. A cheap one with a company logo printed on it. Probably a giveaway from a trade show. I plugged it into the desktop. The computer chimed softly. I created a folder on the drive and labeled it with something boring: Project. Then I began copying. Not everything. I didn't have time to be greedy. I copied the emails that mentioned moving devices and denying refunds. I copied the spreadsheet with transfers. I copied the folder with complaint logs. I copied enough guest intake scans to show a pattern without pulling hundreds of innocent people into it. I copied the notebook scan Mark had saved as a photo file, the one with cash entries and keypad codes. It took longer than I expected, and every few seconds I froze, listening for a creak upstairs, a cough, anything that meant Mark was awake. The house stayed silent. When the last file finished copying, I ejected the USB drive and slid it into my pocket. Then I did the most important part. I didn't leave the computer the way I found it. I didn't minimize windows and walk away. I went through and checked what I'd touched. I closed folders. I cleared recent files. I logged out. I left the desktop asleep, exactly as it had been. I walked back to the laundry room, tucked the USB drive into the bottom of the tote bag under a folded towel, and put everything back where it belonged. When I climbed into bed, Mark shifted in his sleep and mumbled my name, soft and affectionate, like he was dreaming about being a good husband. I lay there, staring into the dark, and felt something inside me settle into a steady line. The next morning, I didn't go to the cabin. I didn't call anyone. I acted like a recovering wife. I made Mark breakfast. I smiled at him. I listened to him talk about weekend rates and filters and branding like none of it mattered. When he left for work, kissing my cheek and telling me to rest, I waited until his car was out of sight. Then I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and opened my credit monitoring account. I hadn't checked it in months because my credit had always been boring. Boring was good. I pulled my full report. At first, nothing jumped out. The same mortgage, the same credit card, the same student loan I'd been paying down slowly for years. Then I saw it. A new inquiry from a regional bank I'd never used. My chest tightened. I clicked the details. It wasn't just an inquiry. There was a new account listed under my name. A checking account opened 3 months ago. I hadn't opened it. I stared at the screen until the words blurred slightly. Then, I blinked hard and read again. Mark hadn't just linked our joint account to an external transfer profile. He'd opened a separate account in my name, a place to move money that didn't look like it was going to him. I felt cold all over, like my blood had turned to water. I clicked into the fraud alert section and froze with my finger hovering over the button. One click and a chain reaction would start. Calls, letters, reports. Mark would find out within hours that something had shifted. He would come home and start asking questions. He would start deleting. He would start rewriting stories. Not yet, I told myself. Not yet. I needed to protect myself first. I needed to separate my finances before he drained anything else. I needed to lock down my identity before he could open more accounts. I needed to make sure that when this broke and it would break, my name wasn't the one standing closest to the explosion. I stood up and walked to the hall closet where we kept important paperwork. The file box was on the top shelf. Mark and I had always kept it there together, like it was a symbol of our shared life. Mortgage documents, insurance policies, copies of IDs, the deed to the cabin. I pulled the box down and set it on the floor. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were folders labeled in my handwriting. Home. Taxes. Cabin. Health. I found the cabin folder and opened it. The deed was there, the property tax statements, the insurance policy, and a new document tucked behind them that I hadn't seen before. A printed form titled Authorization to Manage Property. It had my name typed at the bottom as if I'd signed it, but I hadn't. My signature was there anyway. Crooked. Wrong. Like someone had traced it from an old check. My throat tightened so hard it hurt to swallow. I sat back on my heels on the hallway floor, holding that paper like it was a knife. Mark hadn't just betrayed me. He'd been building a paper version of me that he could use whenever he needed to. A version that agreed. A version that signed. A version that took the blame. I folded the document carefully and slipped it into a manila envelope. Then I did something I hadn't allowed myself to do since that moment. At 3:17 p.m., when I unlocked the front door and heard a woman laugh upstairs, I let the truth land fully in my body. I wasn't living with a husband who made a mistake. I was living with a man who had been planning. And now that I had proof, real proof, files, documents, the device itself, I knew the next step wasn't to scream or cry or beg for answers. The next step was to make sure that when everything collapsed, it collapsed on the people who built the lie, not the woman whose name they'd been hiding behind. I didn't call Mark. I didn't call Megan. I didn't call the police. Not yet. Not because what I'd found wasn't serious, but because the moment I made a move that couldn't be taken back, Mark would start moving too. He'd start covering, deleting, spinning. He'd start painting me as unstable, as sick, as confused from medication. He'd use the hospital stay like a shield and a weapon, and people would want to believe him because he was the charming husband and I was the woman who collapsed from stress. So I stayed quiet and I worked. The first thing I did was take pictures of the forged authorization form in different lighting, close and far, so the paper texture and printer marks were visible. Then I placed it back in the cabin folder and closed the file box like I'd never touched it. I didn't want Mark to notice anything missing. If he suspected I was looking, he'd start locking everything down. I waited until later that morning, around 11, when I knew he'd be at the job site meeting he always scheduled on Tuesdays. Mark was predictable in the way most control freaks are predictable. He liked routines because routines made him feel safe. I drove to a bank across town, not the one we used, not the one that knew Mark by name. My hands were steady on the wheel, even though my stomach kept tightening and loosening like a fist. I parked, walked inside, and asked to open a checking account in my name only. The banker was a young woman with neat braids and a gentle voice. She asked if I wanted a joint account, and I said no without hesitating. She asked if I was married, and I said yes, but I kept my face neutral. She didn't pry. She just pushed forms across the desk and let me sign. My signature looked like mine. That mattered more than I could explain. When the account was open, I transferred a small amount from our joint account. Not enough to trigger a notification, not enough to be obvious. Just enough that I could pay for a hotel room, a lawyer consultation, and a few weeks of groceries if I had to disappear quickly. I told myself I was being cautious, but the truth was, I was being honest with myself for the first time. I might need to leave fast. Back in my car, I sat with my hands on the steering wheel and stared out at the parking lot. People walked in and out carrying bags, coffee cups, babies on their hips. Their lives looked simple from the outside. Mine probably looked simple too. A house, a husband, a steady job, a little lake cabin as a side income. The kind of life people called blessed. I felt something cold pass through me again. That steady calm I'd started recognizing as my new baseline. I drove home and parked in the garage like nothing had changed. Inside, I put the tote bag on the laundry room shelf, hidden behind detergent. I put the USB drive in an old jewelry box I never used, under loose buttons and spare earring backs. Then I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and pulled up the county property records. The cabin was still in my name. The tax payments were current. There weren't any obvious liens. That was good. It also meant Mark hadn't been stupid enough to try to transfer the deed. He knew that would trigger paperwork I'd see. Instead, he'd created an authorization form, a way to make it look like I'd given him permission to act on my behalf. That was easier to fake and harder to catch until it mattered. I opened my email and searched my inbox for anything related to the cabin. There were a few automatic notifications from the rental platform. A couple of messages from guests months ago. Nothing else. Mark had routed everything through his own channels. He'd been building a separate world I wasn't invited into. I started making calls that afternoon, but not the obvious calls. I didn't call the rental platform to report cameras. I didn't call law enforcement. I called people who wouldn't trigger alarms. First, I called our homeowner's insurance provider and asked a question as if I were just being responsible. If someone stays at a property we own, I said, and there's a complaint about surveillance equipment, would that be covered under liability? The representative hesitated, asked me to clarify, and I kept it vague. Just hypothetically, I said. Like, if a guest accused the host of something? The rep's tone shifted to cautious professionalism. She said anything involving illegal surveillance wouldn't be covered and could void coverage. She said if there were devices installed, they needed to be disclosed and compliant with state law. She said a claim like that would likely lead to investigation. I thanked her, hung up, and sat in the quiet kitchen, letting the implications sink in. Mark wasn't just risking money. He was risking my insurance, my liability, my future. He was risking everything with my name on it because he assumed I'd never find out until it was too late to separate myself. Next, I called a friend from work, a woman named Tasha, who'd been in compliance longer than I had and had a way of speaking that cut straight through fluff. I didn't tell her about Mark. I didn't tell her about the cabin. I framed it as a hypothetical. If someone opened a bank account using another person's identity, I asked, and moved funds through it, what would be the cleanest way to prove the person didn't authorize it? There's woe. Tasha didn't laugh. She didn't ask why. She just said, documentation, timelines, copies of everything. Don't touch anything. You don't have to. And don't tell the person you suspect until you've locked down your own accounts and credit. She paused, then added, and you need legal counsel. Not later. Now. Okay, I said, my throat tight. She said gently, and the way she said my name told me she knew it wasn't hypothetical. Whatever this is, don't try to be brave alone. Smart doesn't mean alone. When did. After I hung up, I sat there staring at my phone for a long time. Part of me wanted to call Megan, to hear my sister's voice and let myself fall apart for a minute. But Megan was far away and loud and impulsive. Megan would call Mark and scream at him, and then my window would slam shut. So instead, I opened my laptop and searched for attorneys. Not divorce attorneys first. Whistleblower and fraud attorneys. Identity theft specialists. I needed someone who understood that this wasn't just a marriage. This was a paper trail with criminal edges. I found a local firm that specialized in financial fraud and privacy issues. Their site talked about data misuse, unauthorized accounts, unauthorized recordings. It used language that made my skin crawl because it matched what I'd seen in Mark's files. I filled out a consultation request using my personal email and asked for the earliest available appointment. Then I did the thing that hurt the most, because it made everything real in a way that photos and emails didn't. I froze my credit. I went through each bureau, answered security questions that suddenly felt insulting, and clicked the button. Freeze. 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 Each confirmation number appeared on my screen like a small lock clicking into place. It felt like shutting a door on my own life. After that, I logged into our joint bank account and changed my password. Then I logged out and logged back in, making sure the new password worked, making sure I could still access it. I didn't change Mark's access. Not yet. That would be a loud move, but I needed to know I could see what was happening at any moment. When Mark got home that evening, he looked tired in the way he always did when he'd spent the day being charming to strangers. He kissed me hello, asked how I felt, told me about a meeting that ran long, and then casually mentioned he needed to go to the cabin the next day to fix some things. My stomach stayed calm. My face stayed soft. Okay, I said. Just be careful. Don't overdo it. He smiled. Look at you. Still taking care of me. If he only knew. He showered, ate dinner, watched TV with me like we were normal. At one point, he picked up my hand and ran his thumb over my knuckles. A quiet, affectionate gesture. I watched his face while he did it and tried to remember the last time I'd felt safe with him. I couldn't find it. Not clearly. It was like safety had been a story I told myself so I could keep living without looking too hard. Later, when he fell asleep, I got out of bed and went back to the file box in the closet. I pulled out the cabin folder again and removed the forged authorization form for good. I replaced it with a blank sheet of paper so the stack thickness felt the same. Then I put the forged form into a manila envelope along with printed copies of the most important screenshots I'd taken. The email about moving the device, the transfer profile, the guest complaint. I wrote one word on the front of the envelope in careful block letters. Evidence. I slid it into the bottom drawer of my dresser, under old sweaters, behind a shoebox. Mark never went into my dresser. He never had. He didn't think he needed to. I lay back down and stared into the dark again, listening to his breathing. My mind kept replaying one sentence from Lauren's email. Bedroom is better anyway. It wasn't just the betrayal that made my stomach turn. It was the entitlement. The way they treated strangers like targets. The way Mark used my name like a disposable glove. I knew then that whatever I did next had to do two things at once. It had to protect me. Cleanly, legally, permanently. And it had to expose them in a way that couldn't be smoothed over with charm or apologies. I didn't want Mark hurt. I didn't want violence. I didn't want anything that would make me look like the villain in his story. I wanted the truth to do what truth does when it's documented and placed in the right hands. I wanted it to land like a building collapse fast, loud, unavoidable. And I wanted Mark to realize, too late, that the wife he thought he could outsmart had been quietly building the exit while he was busy building a trap. The next morning, Mark left the house before sunrise with a travel mug of coffee and that restless energy he got when he thought he was getting away with something. He kissed my forehead and told me not to lift anything heavy, like the biggest danger in my life was a laundry basket. I'll be at the cabin most of the day, he said. Just fixing a few things. Cleaning up. Making sure it's ready. Okay, I said, soft and agreeable. Text me when you get there. Hey. He smiled like he appreciated my trust. Always. The second his car pulled out of the driveway, I moved. I didn't go back to the cabin. Not yet. I already had enough proof to ruin him if I wanted to, and I wasn't interested in dragging my body through another 40-minute drive just to watch him rearrange lies. What I needed now was the larger shape of what Mark and Lauren were doing, who else was involved, who else benefited, and who else could break them when the time came. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop like it was a normal workday. I opened the rental platform, then Mark's co-host profile, then Lauren's linked information. The platform didn't show much, but there were breadcrumbs. A business email, a website link, an Instagram account. Lauren Pierce's page was exactly what you'd expect. Clean white backgrounds, staged interiors, caption after caption about creating experiences, a lot of smiling photos holding coffee cups, and just enough luxury to make people want to believe she was successful. She posted a reel from the cabin's deck, my aunt's deck, stripped of its old wooden chairs and replaced with modern loungers talking about lake mornings, like she'd been born there. I watched it without sound, focusing on what was behind her. The railing. The corner of the living room window. The light fixture she'd replaced. Then I noticed something that made me stop scrolling. In the reflection of the window behind her, there was a man. Not Mark. Older, broader shoulders, wearing a crisp button-down. He was standing inside, looking down at his phone, completely relaxed. Lauren's caption tagged a location and a person. The person tag was a private account, but the name showed. Gavin Rowe. The name didn't mean anything to me at first. I clicked the tag anyway. Private account. No posts visible. But his profile picture was clear enough. A man in his late 40s or early 50s, salt and pepper hair, confident smile, standing in front of a backdrop with a logo I recognized from local news. Rowe Development Group. My pulse ticked up. Rowe Development had been in the paper constantly for the last 2 years. Mixed-use projects, riverfront revitalization, affordable housing initiatives that always seemed to end with luxury condos anyway. Gavin Rowe was one of those men who called himself a civic leader while buying influence with donations and handshake deals. I'd seen his name in public records at work. His company bid on contracts, his projects required approvals, and he was the type of person my agency flagged for extra review because his money made people forget the rules. I sat back in my chair and let the connection form fully. Lauren wasn't just cheating with Mark. Lauren was attached to a developer with reach. Mark worked in construction project management. Mark knew permits, inspectors, timelines. Lauren managed a cabin rental that collected IDs and card data under my name. It wasn't 3 separate things. It was one thing with different faces. I kept scrolling Lauren's page. Slower now, like I was reading a report. I checked her comments, her followers, her tagged photos. I found a picture from 3 months ago at a charity gala downtown. Lauren in a black dress, smiling beside Gavin Rowe, their bodies angled toward each other in that intimate way people have when they don't care who sees. Her caption said something about celebrating community leaders. He'd commented with a heart emoji. I stared at that heart emoji until it made me feel sick. Then I opened another tab and searched Gavin Rowe's name. His company website came up first. Professional headshots, press releases, a section about their commitment to transparency. I clicked the news section and found an article with a photo of him cutting a ribbon next to city council members. I recognized one of them too, Councilwoman Denise Harrow, who had been publicly questioned last year about taking gifts from developers. This wasn't just my marriage. This was something that could rot an entire system if it stayed hidden. I didn't want to be the person who lit that match in a way that burned everyone indiscriminately. I wanted precision. I wanted control. I wanted accountability to land on the people who deserved it. I opened my notes app and started another list. Lauren Pierce co-host, access device, guest data. Mark Carter forged documents. Accounts in my name. Device placement. Transfers. Gavin Rowe appears at cabin. Close relationship with Lauren. Political ties. Possible motive leverage. Blackmail. Money laundering. Identity theft. The words looked harsh on the screen, but they were just words until I could tie them to evidence. I needed proof that Gavin Rowe had direct involvement. Not just a photo. Not just a tag. Proof. Around noon, I got a text from Mark. At the cabin. I stared at the message, feeling that familiar twist of disgust, then typed back, "Love you too. Take breaks. Don't rush." My fingers didn't hesitate. That was the scariest part. I was learning to lie as smoothly as he did. Then, I called Rita. "Hey, it's Emily," I said when she answered. "Quick question." Rita was quiet for a second. "Lauren was there earlier," she said carefully. My grip tightened on the phone. Rita lowered her voice. "There was a man. Drove a black SUV. I've seen him before." Before when?" I asked. "With Lauren," Rita said. "He comes sometimes. Not often, but enough that I remember him. Do you know his name?" I asked. "No," Rita said. "But he acts like he owns the place." I closed my eyes for a second, letting that sink in. "Did Mark know he was coming?" "I don't know," Rita said. "Mark wasn't there when he arrived. Lauren let him in with the keypad. So Lauren had brought Gavin Rowe to my cabin using access Mark gave her, while Mark wasn't there. That meant the cabin wasn't just Mark's affair nest. It was a meeting place, a controlled environment, a place where they could collect and store and hide things under the cover of guests and turnovers. Rita, I said, keeping my voice soft, if you ever feel uncomfortable there, you can tell me. Rita exhaled like she'd been holding her breath. Okay, she said. After I hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. My body felt tired in a way that wasn't physical, like my muscles were holding up a structure that kept getting heavier. At 2:30, my phone buzzed with an email confirmation from the law firm I'd contacted. I needed a move I could make now that didn't trigger Mark, didn't alert Lauren, and didn't put me in the line of fire. So I did what I always did at work when a situation felt unstable. I followed the money and the paperwork. I opened my county's online business registry and searched for Pierce Staging and Design. It was registered. LLC. Opened about 8 months ago. Registered agent listed under a mail service address downtown. I searched for Row Development Group. Active. Massive. Multiple subsidiaries. Then I searched for any overlap, any shared address, any shared agent, any shared filing. It took a while, but then I found it. A smaller entity, barely noticeable. Registered just 4 months ago. Larkspur Hospitality Solutions, LLC. The address listed was the same mail service Lauren used. The registered agent was different, but the manager name on the filing was a familiar one. Mark Carter. My hands went cold again. Mark had created a new business entity tied to the cabin's location name, using Lauren's infrastructure, likely to funnel money through. And now Gavin Rowe was showing up at my property like it was part of his world too. I clicked through the filings and found a scanned document attached. A business bank account authorization. A signature on the bottom that looked like Mark's, messy and confident. And below it, as the property owner consent, was my name, Emily Carter. Not signed, but typed. Like a placeholder. Like he assumed he could forge it when he needed it. I took screenshots. I saved the filing. I printed it to PDF and stored it in a secure folder that wasn't connected to anything Mark could access. Then I sat back and stared at my kitchen wall, at the little scuff mark near the baseboard from when we moved the couch last year. Such a small, ordinary mark in such an ordinary house. I thought about how Mark had walked through our life smiling and steady, building a second life under my feet, and how I'd almost believed it was just a marriage falling apart. It wasn't. It was a system, a network. And I was standing in the middle of it, with my name pinned to everything like a tag. That evening, Mark came home, sunburned and cheerful, acting like a man who'd done honest work. He told me he replaced a smoke detector at the cabin and tightened up a few things. He told me he met with a guy from town about possible future renovations. He didn't say Gavin Rowe's name. I smiled and listened and let him talk. When he finally went upstairs, I sat alone in the living room with my phone in my hand and one thought repeating in my head, steady and sharp. If a man like Gavin Rowe was involved, this wasn't going to end with a simple divorce. This was going to end with something public, and the only question left was whether I would be crushed under it or whether I would step aside at the last second and let the people who built the lie take the full weight of it. By Thursday morning, I could predict Mark's mood by the way he set his keys down. If they landed softly, placed with care, he was feeling in control. If he tossed them on the counter and let them clatter, he was irritated, usually because something hadn't gone exactly the way he planned. That morning he placed them carefully, which told me he was pleased with himself. He had no idea I'd spent the last 48 hours building a quiet wall around my identity and collecting everything I needed to step away clean. He also had no idea I was about to hand him the rope he'd been asking for. At breakfast, I pushed my scrambled eggs around my plate and watched him drink coffee like a man who slept well. He talked about the cabin like it was a business he'd started from scratch. He used words like scaling and optimizing and positioning, like the lake house was a tech startup and not a place that used to smell like my aunt's cedar candles and old paperbacks. I've been thinking, he said, leaning back in his chair. We should formalize things. Make it cleaner. If we're bringing in as much as we are, we need to protect ourselves. Protect ourselves. I almost choked on it. What do you mean? I asked, keeping my voice calm. An LLC, he said. A real structure. Taxes, liability, all that. I already started the paperwork, but I didn't want to stress you out while you were in the hospital. He said it like he was proud. Like he'd done me a favor. I didn't realize you'd started paperwork, I said carefully. It's nothing crazy, he said. Just smart. And it'll help with the bank, too. My heart rate stayed even. The bank? He nodded, like he'd been waiting for me to ask. We should refinance the house, he said, casual, as if he were suggesting we repaint the living room. Rates are shifting. We've got equity, we can pull some out, use it to renovate the cabin properly, and maybe pick up a second rental. There it was. The real goal. Mark didn't want just my cabin. He wanted leverage. He wanted liquidity. He wanted to turn our home into a source of cash he could control, moving it through entities he set up, through accounts he could hide. And if it ever blew up, my name would still be on the deeds and the paperwork. A week ago, if he'd said this, I would have argued. I would have asked for numbers, details, logic. I would have made it a discussion. He would have turned it into a fight, then a makeup, then a compromise that somehow left him in charge anyway. Instead, I lifted my eyes to his and softened my face the way he liked. That might be smart, I said. Mark blinked, surprised. He covered it quickly with a smile. Yeah? Yeah, I said. I don't want to be blindsided. If we do it, I want it to be transparent. His smile widened like I'd handed him a gift. Of course, he said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. You can look at everything. I let him touch me, and I let myself smile back. Because I wasn't agreeing to refinance. I wasn't agreeing to anything. I was letting him believe I was stepping back into the version of me he needed. The tired wife who wanted peace. The wife who didn't want conflict. The wife who could be guided. The rest of the day, I played my part. I asked him questions like I was curious, not suspicious. I let him explain things. I let him talk himself into a rhythm where he forgot to be careful. What kind of renovations? I asked, as he paced around the living room with his phone in his hand. Bigger stuff, he said. New appliances. Maybe a hot tub. That's what people pay for. A hot tub, I repeated, like I was considering it. Yeah, he said. And maybe cameras outside. Security. Guests like that. My stomach tightened. Outside, he said quickly, sensing something in my tone. Like doorbell cams. Not inside. I'm not insane. I nodded slowly, as if reassured. Right. Outside makes sense. He kissed my forehead and told me I was doing great. He told me he was proud of me for being calm after the hospital scare. He said maybe it had been a wake-up call for both of us to focus on building a future. Building a future. He said it like a blessing. That evening, I got a text from the law firm confirming my appointment for the next morning. I didn't tell Mark. I didn't mention it. I took a shower, put on pajamas, and sat beside him on the couch while he watched sports highlights, laughing at clips like the world was uncomplicated. At one point, his phone buzzed and he glanced at the screen, then stood up. I'm going to take this in the office, he said, already walking away. Okay, I said, not looking up. The office door closed. His voice dropped low, muffled. I sat there and stared at the TV without seeing it, listening to the cadence of his speech, the little pauses where he was listening to someone else. My mind filled in Lauren's voice, Gavin Rowe's voice, the quiet, confident voices of people who thought they could do whatever they wanted because they'd never been stopped. When Mark came back, his expression was neutral, but his eyes were bright. He was excited. Everything okay? I asked. Yeah, he said too fast. Just work stuff. I nodded and leaned my head against the couch cushion like I was sleepy. That night, after he fell asleep, I got up and walked to the kitchen and opened the drawer where we kept scissors and tape. I pulled out a small stack of new envelopes and a black pen. I didn't need them for anything practical. I needed them for something psychological. I wrote 3 names on 3 envelopes in clean block letters. Emily Personal, Emily Work, Emily Cabin. Then I sat at the table and divided what I had into categories, the way I would if I were preparing a case file for an investigator. Screenshots and printouts went into the cabin envelope. Proof of the forged authorization form and the new account went into personal. My credit freeze confirmations and identity notes went into work because if this touched my job, I needed the timeline to protect myself. When I finished, I sealed them and tucked them in a shoebox in the back of my closet under winter boots Mark never touched. Then I returned to bed and stared at the ceiling fan, turning slow circles above us. The next morning, I went to the attorney's office alone. I told Mark I had a follow-up appointment with my primary care doctor. He didn't question it. He liked the idea of me being monitored. It made him feel like he still had a role. The attorney, a woman named Claire Hansen, didn't waste time. She listened without interrupting while I laid out facts. Not emotions, not betrayal. Facts. My name on the property, the co-host access, the hidden device, the account in my name, the forged authorization form, the LLC filing, with my name typed, the emails suggesting device relocation. Claire's face stayed calm, but her eyes sharpened as I spoke. When I finished, she leaned back and said, "You did the right thing by not confronting him." My throat tightened. "What do I do now?" "We protect you first," she said. "Then we decide how to report this in a way that doesn't backfire." She asked if I felt physically unsafe. I said no. She asked if Mark had access to my work accounts. I said no. She asked if I could stay somewhere else if needed. I said yes. Then she told me something that made my stomach drop in a different way. "If there's any indication guests were recorded in private areas," she said, "this becomes a major legal problem. For him, for the co-host, for anyone involved." "Even if it's my property?" I asked. "Especially because it's your property," she said. "Because your name is attached. That's why we need to move carefully, document everything, and make sure you're clearly separated from the conduct." She gave me a plan. Step by step. Not dramatic. Not vengeful. Procedural. Lock down accounts. Change access to the rental platform. Notify the platform through counsel. Report identity theft through the proper channels. Preserve evidence in a way that maintains integrity. And most importantly, do not tip him off until the moment the report is made. When I left the office, the air outside felt colder than it should have. I sat in my car and gripped the steering wheel, letting the plan settle in my body. Mark thought he was steering me toward refinancing, toward signing things, toward making his control legal and permanent. I was going to let him keep thinking that for just a little longer. That night at dinner, I told him, "I've been thinking about what you said." His eyes lit up. "Yeah? I'm open to it," I said. "But I want to look at everything together this weekend, like a real sit-down. Numbers, accounts, paperwork." Mark's smile was immediate and unguarded. "Absolutely," he said. "We'll do it right." He reached across the table and covered my hand with his, warm and confident, like he was sealing a deal. And as I smiled back, I realized how easy it was for him to mistake patience for weakness. He didn't understand that I wasn't agreeing to build a future with him. I was scheduling the moment his future would start collapsing. Saturday morning, Mark woke up energized, like a man preparing for a presentation. He made coffee, set out papers on the dining table, and kept checking his phone like he was waiting for someone to confirm the timing. He wore one of his nicer polos, the one he usually saved for client meetings, and he kept calling what we were about to do a strategy session, which would have been funny if it didn't make my skin crawl. I sat across from him in sweatpants and a loose sweatshirt, hair still damp from a shower, and let him think the contrast meant something that I was casual, unprepared, still recovering. I kept my posture slightly slouched. I kept my voice soft. I let my eyes look tired on purpose. Mark spread out a printed spreadsheet, a few bank statements, and a glossy brochure from our lender about home equity options. He tapped the papers with his index finger like he was guiding a child through homework. "So," he said, smiling, "here's where we are. The cabin's doing great. Better than great. If we pull equity and invest back into the property, we can double revenue by fall." I nodded. "Okay." He launched into numbers. Weekend rates, projected occupancy, estimated renovation costs. He'd clearly rehearsed it. He had charts. He had bullet points. He had a calm confidence that would have persuaded anyone who didn't know the foundation was rotten. "What about the cabin account?" I asked, like I was just being responsible. "It's all tracked," he said quickly. "I can show you." He opened his laptop and turned it toward me. The screen displayed a clean spreadsheet with tidy columns. It looked legitimate. But I recognized the numbers because I'd already seen the real file. This was a version meant for me. "Looks good," I said, and watched relief spread over his face. Then I asked, gently, "Do you have the LLC paperwork?" Mark's eyes flicked toward his phone again, then back to me. "Yeah," he said. "I've got the filing confirmation. It's all above board." He pulled up a document on his laptop and scrolled. I leaned in slightly, as if I were reading closely. But my eyes weren't on the legal language. They were on his hands. His thumb kept tapping his trackpad like he was impatient, like he wanted this done. "What do you need from me?" I asked. Mark smiled, wide and eager. Mostly just your support, he said. And, eventually, signatures. Not today. We can take it slow. He was lying, but it wasn't a hard lie. It was the kind of lie designed to feel like comfort. He wanted signatures, and he wanted them soon. He just didn't want to scare me into asking questions. I nodded again, then let my gaze drift to his phone on the table. It buzzed once and he flipped it over fast. Too fast. Everything okay? I asked, still soft. Yeah, he said. Just Lauren. There it was, the name slipping out without meaning to. I tilted my head like I was thinking. Lauren, I repeated. That's the staging person? Mark's smile tightened. Yeah, she's been helping. It's business. Do I need to meet her? I asked. He hesitated. The smallest hesitation, then leaned forward with a bright grin. Actually, he said, that's not a bad idea. She's really good. She's the reason the listing looks so professional. I thought maybe we could all grab coffee today. Keep it friendly. She can show you ideas. My pulse stayed even. Inside, something clicked into place. He wasn't just offering coffee. He was trying to normalize her. If I met her, if I shook her hand, if I smiled, then later, if anything came out, he could say she was just a business partner. He could say, I approved. He could say, I knew. He was trying to put my consent on her existence the way he'd typed my name onto documents. I smiled. Sure, I said. Coffee sounds fine. Mark's face brightened like a child who'd been told yes. Great, he said. While he typed, I stood up slowly and said, I'm going to grab some water. Des2. In the kitchen, with my back turned, I took my phone out and opened the secure folder Claire had helped me set up. I checked the drafted communication to the rental platform, already prepared to send through counsel the moment I gave the signal. I checked the draft police report template Claire had given me for identity theft, with dates and account numbers ready. Everything was staged, like a set behind a curtain. I filled my glass and walked back to the table. Mark was still smiling. She said she can meet at 1, he said. Downtown, that cafe with the patio. I nodded. Perfect. At 12:58, we walked into the cafe, and my stomach did that small tightening thing it had been doing all week, a physical reminder that my body remembered danger even when my face didn't show it. The cafe smelled like espresso and baked sugar. Music played softly overhead. People sat with laptops, couples leaned close over brunch plates, and no one looked like they were about to have their life dismantled. Lauren Pierce was already there at a corner table by the window. She stood up when she saw Mark, smiling with practiced warmth. She was prettier in person than in photos. Clear skin, bright eyes, a body that looked like she worked out because she wanted to. She wore a cream sweater and gold hoops, casual, expensive, and she held her phone like it was an accessory. Mark kissed her cheek. Not a business greeting, not a handshake, a kiss, quick and familiar. He did it in front of me, like he'd forgotten for a second that I existed. Then he looked at me, and his face flickered. A micro-panic. A correction. He said, too bright. This is Lauren. As Way. Lauren's gaze slid over me, from my face to my posture to my hospital wristband bruise fading on my arm, and she smiled like she was meeting a client, not a wife. Emily, she said. It's so nice to finally meet you. I held her hand when she reached out. Her grip was firm. Her nails were pale pink with chipped tips, the same nails I'd seen draped over my sheets. I kept my face neutral. I kept my smile small. Hi, I said. I've heard a lot about you too. Gred. Mark pulled out a chair for me like he was trying to rewrite the scene. Lauren sat across, angled toward him. Mark sat beside me, too close, his knee brushing mine like he was claiming space. Lauren launched into talk about the cabin, about branding, guest experience, luxury touches. She showed pictures on her phone, my aunt's cabin transformed into a beige modern set, with carefully placed throw blankets and staged mugs. She said the word we constantly. We switched out the art. We upgraded the linens. We changed the keypad protocol. I watched Mark while she spoke. He looked proud, like he was admiring a partner. Not a contractor, not a co-host, a partner. At one point, Lauren leaned in and said, the demand is huge. People will pay for privacy and comfort. especially professionals. People who don't want surprises. I felt my stomach clench at the word privacy, but I kept my expression calm. That makes sense, I said. I saw some guest forms at the cabin, the ones with IDs attached. Is that standard? Lauren's smile didn't change, but her eyes sharpened slightly. It's just for security, she said. Mark's really good about protecting guests. Mark laughed. Yeah, he said. We've had a couple sketchy bookings. This helps. I nodded slowly, like I accepted that answer. Then I asked, quietly, and the new smoke detector? Someone complained about it, right? I saw an email about guests feeling watched. Mark's hand tightened on his coffee cup. Lauren's eyes flicked to him. Fast. That was nothing, Mark said quickly. Some anxious guests. It happens. Lauren laughed lightly. You'd be amazed what people invent when they're on vacation. I took a slow sip of water, letting a beat pass, and then I said, still calm, still soft. So there aren't any cameras in the cabin. Silence landed on the table like a weight. Not a long silence. Just a half second too long. Mark's mouth opened and closed. Lauren's smile stayed in place. But it looked slightly stiffer now, like she was holding it up with effort. Of course not, Mark said, voice too quick. Why would you even ask that? I set my glass down gently. Because it's my property, I said. And my name. Mark's eyes narrowed slightly, just a flicker. Lauren's gaze stayed steady, but I could see calculation behind it. I could feel the moment tipping. Not into a fight yet, but into something unstable, like a floorboard cracking under weight. And as I sat there in that bright cafe, with Mark's knee pressed against mine and Lauren's chipped pink nails wrapped around her coffee cup, I realized I didn't need to accuse them. I just needed to give them enough rope to show themselves. Because once they did, everything would start moving, and no amount of charm would stop what was already in motion. Mark's face stayed smooth for a second after I said my name, like he was trying to decide which version of himself to use. The husband, the businessman, the man who could talk his way out of anything. Lauren's expression didn't change at all, but her posture did. She sat a little straighter, one shoulder tightening, like she was preparing to pivot. I let the silence sit just long enough to make them uncomfortable, then I softened it with a small, almost apologetic smile. I'm not accusing anyone, I said. I just want to be sure. People talk. I work in compliance. If there's even a rumor, it could touch my job. Mark's shoulders dropped a fraction. He grabbed the lifeline. Exactly, he said quickly. That's what I've been saying. We need to protect you. Protect us. That's why I'm doing the LLC. All the paperwork. It's all clean. Lauren nodded, sympathetic. Totally, she said. And for the record, we would never put anything inside. It's just basic safety upgrades. Smoke detectors, door sensors, that kind of thing. Door sensors. I kept my face neutral. I didn't respond. I just nodded like a reasonable person being reassured. Mark reached across the table and placed his hand over mine like he was reclaiming control in public. We're good, he said softly. You're safe. Okay? I looked at him and held his gaze. Okay, I said. Lauren's smile widened slightly, relieved. She started talking again, pitching renovations like she was selling a dream. Luxury touches. She mentioned partnering with local investors who could help scale to multiple properties. She said it casually, like she was floating an idea, but I saw the way Mark's eyes lit up. Investors. That was the door to bigger money. That was the door to people like Gavin Rowe. I didn't ask about Gavin. Not yet. I didn't need to. I already knew enough. The point of this coffee wasn't to catch them in a lie at the table. The point was to make them feel confident again, so they'd keep moving, keep leaving tracks. When we left the cafe, Mark acted extra affectionate. He put his hand on the small of my back as we walked. He opened my car door. He told Lauren, "We'll talk later," with a tone that wasn't businesslike at all. Lauren smiled at me and said, "I'm so glad you're feeling better, Emily," like she cared. As soon as Mark and I pulled into the driveway, his smile dropped. "Why did you bring up cameras?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm, but it came out tight. I stepped out of the car slowly. "I didn't bring it up out of nowhere," I said. I saw the complaint thread. It made me nervous. Mark's eyes flicked away. "You were on my email?" "No," I said softly. "I was on the rental account." Mine. The one I created. His jaw tightened. You shouldn't be stressing yourself out, 18 said. I looked at him. Mark, I said, and kept my voice gentle. If we're going to refinance the house, if we're going to put everything under an LLC, I need to understand what's happening. That's not stress. That's common sense. He stared at me for a second, then forced a smile back onto his face like he was putting on a mask. You're right, he said. You're right. We'll go through everything this week. I promise. He kissed my cheek, but it felt like a stamp, not affection. That night he kept his phone on him constantly. He went outside twice to take a call. He took a shower with the bathroom door locked. He didn't touch me in bed. He lay on his back and stared at the ceiling until he fell asleep, and I could feel tension coming off him in waves. They were scared now. Not fully, but enough. The next morning, Sunday, my phone buzzed with an email from Claire. She'd sent the draft notification to the rental platform, the one that would trigger an investigation and lock down the listing. She asked one simple question. Ready? I stared at the word and felt my heart shift into that cold, steady line again. Not yet, I thought. Not until I'm out of the blast zone. By midday, I had done everything Claire told me to do. I packed a small bag with essentials and left it in my trunk under a blanket. I moved my important documents to a safe place outside the house. I transferred a little more money into my separate account, again in a way that wouldn't alert Mark. I booked a hotel room across town under my name, just in case I needed somewhere to sleep that night. Then I waited. At 4:22 p.m., Mark walked into the living room with a folder in his hand and that bright, eager face again. He was pushing forward. That was his pattern. When he felt threatened, he accelerated. Let's do it, he said. Let's finish the plan. I've got the lender paperwork ready. Just preliminary. No commitment. We just need to sign the authorization to pull your credit. My throat tightened. So, that was it. He wanted my signature. He wanted to run my credit again. He wanted access to accounts. He wanted to make the refinance real before I could stop it. I took the folder and flipped through slowly, even though my pulse was hammering. The papers were clean, neatly printed. The language looked normal. And then I saw a signature line already populated with my name in typed text, waiting for my pen. Mark watched me closely, trying to read my face. It's standard, he said, just so they can evaluate options. I looked up. Why is this urgent? He smiled, but it was strained. Because timing matters, he said. Rates, approvals, all of it. We shouldn't waste time. There it was again. His impatience. His sense of entitlement to my agreement. I set the folder down on the coffee table. I'm not signing anything today, I said calmly. Mark's smile dropped. I'm not signing, I repeated, still calm. My voice sounded steady even to me. Not until I've reviewed everything. Not until I've talked to someone. Mark's eyes narrowed. My own advisor, I said. His face changed. Not dramatically. Just a hardening. The mask slipping enough for me to see the anger beneath it. Since when do you need an advisor? Since my name started showing up on documents I didn't sign, I said. The room went quiet. Mark froze. He stared at me like he was trying to decide if I was bluffing. What are you talking about? He said, voice low. I found the authorization form in the cabin folder, I said. The one with my signature forged. His eyes flicked, just once, toward the hall closet. Then back to me. That's ridiculous, he said quickly. You're imagining things. You're still recovering. I nodded slowly, like I expected that. I also found a bank account in my name that I didn't open, I said. And emails about guest complaints that mention moving a device to the bedroom. Mark's face drained slightly. Stop, he said, the word sharp. Stop saying things you don't understand. I stood up, still calm. I understand perfectly, I said. I understand that you used my property. You used my identity. And you thought I'd never check. Aiden. Mark stood too, his chair scraping the floor. You went through my stuff, he snapped. I held his gaze. I went through my life, I said. The life you've been rewriting. His chest rose and fell quickly. His hands flexed like he wanted to grab the folder, grab his phone, grab control back. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, voice tight. "Lauren handles the listing. I just help. It's business. The account was for taxes. You're blowing this up." I'm scrayed. "No," I said softly. "You blew it up. I just finally saw the smoke." For a second, Mark looked like he might apologize. Like he might try tears, try softness, try the husband again. Then his phone buzzed, and he glanced at it, and whatever was on the screen changed his expression completely. Fear. Real fear. He stepped back, eyes locked on the phone, and whispered, "No." I watched him, heart steady, and realized something had happened outside this room. Something had moved without my touch. Mark looked up at me with a kind of panic I'd never seen on his face before. "What did you do?" he demanded. I didn't answer right away. I didn't need to. The sound of his phone, buzzing, again and again, filled the space between us like an alarm. And in that moment, standing in our living room with the refinance folder on the table and Mark's mask finally cracking, I understood that the collapse had already started. I just hadn't been the one to push the first domino. Mark's phone kept buzzing in his hand like it was alive. He stared at the screen, swiping, reading, swiping again, his breathing getting shallow. He didn't look at the refinance folder anymore. He stood in the middle of the living room as if the floor might open under him. "What did you do?" he asked again, louder this time. I kept my voice calm. "I haven't done anything today." He looked at me like he didn't believe words could be true unless they served him. His thumb moved faster. His eyes darted left and right as he read whatever was coming in. Then his phone rang, and the name on the screen made his face tighten. He answered. "Yeah?" I heard a woman's voice through the speaker, sharp and fast. "Lauren." She was talking too quickly to make out every word, but I caught fragments. "Locked. Listing. Account. What the hell? They're asking questions. I can't access." Mark turned away from me, lowering his voice. "Calm down," he hissed. "What do you mean locked?" Lauren's voice rose. "The platform. They froze it. They sent an email about an investigation. Someone reported something, Mark. Someone said there were cameras. They're asking for proof. They want the device info. They want..." Mark's eyes flicked to me again, rage and panic mixing. He put a hand over the phone microphone. "Did you report us?" "Us," I repeated softly, like I was tasting the word. "That's interesting." He ignored it and spoke into the phone again, voice low and urgent. "Listen to me. Don't say anything. Delete anything you have. Do you hear me? Delete it." Lauren snapped back. "I'm not deleting anything. That's evidence." Mark's voice sharpened. "Then move it. Get it out of there. Out of there. The cabin. The device. The files." I watched him pace while he argued with her, and for the first time since this started, I felt something close to satisfaction, not because someone was suffering, but because the truth was finally making them scramble. They were no longer calm. They were no longer in control. Mark hung up and immediately dialed another number. This time, his tone changed. Smoother, respectful. He was switching masks. "Gavin," he said when the call connected. My stomach tightened at the name, but I kept my face still. Mark walked toward the window, half turning his body away like that would keep his words from reaching me. "Yeah, it's happening," he said. "The platform froze the listing. They're investigating. I told you this could happen if someone..." He stopped, listening. His shoulders tensed. Then he said, "No, I didn't tell her. She doesn't know." He glanced at me again, and I saw something new in his eyes. Calculation. The look of a man deciding whether to sacrifice someone else to save himself. "Em's freaking out," he said into the phone. "She's asking questions. I think she might have reported it." My heart stayed steady, but something cold spread through my chest. He was already setting the story, already building the narrative where I was unstable and reactive. He listened again, nodding, then said, Okay, I'll handle it. This is Dilbin." He ended the call and turned toward me with a face that looked almost calm again. "You told someone," he said. I shook my head. "Not today. Stop with the word games," he snapped. "Did you report the cabin or not?" I held his gaze. "I scheduled a consultation with an attorney," I said. Mark's face flickered. An attorney. Yes, I said, because my name is on everything. His jaw tightened. You're trying to ruin me! Bass. I let that hang for a second, then said, Mark, you opened a bank account in my name. You forged my signature. You gave someone access to my property and collected guest IDs. And you're standing here asking me if I'm the problem. His hands curled into fists and then released. It was business, he said, voice rising. You don't understand. You never understood. You sit at your little compliance job and think the world runs on rules. It doesn't. People do what they have to do. Take it off, Ter, what you had to do. I corrected quietly. He stepped closer. If you hadn't collapsed, he said, and the cruelty in the words was sudden and raw, none of this would be happening. If you hadn't been out of commission, if you hadn't been weak, you wouldn't have come home early, and he stopped himself. Too late. I stared at him. His breathing hitched. His eyes darted again to his phone. It buzzed. He ignored it. Then it buzzed again. He finally looked, and whatever he read made him go pale. He whispered, No. This time he didn't ask what I did. He didn't accuse me. He just stared at the screen like it was a death sentence. What is it? I asked, calm. Mark's lips moved, but no sound came out. He swiped and held the phone closer to his face, reading. Then he looked up at me like he'd never seen me before. They froze the bank transfer, he said. The account. The one. In your name. It's flagged. I felt a slow exhale leave my chest. This was the first domino I hadn't pushed. And now I knew why. The credit freeze. The account alerts. The fact that I'd locked down my identity. It had triggered a system Mark couldn't charm. A machine that didn't care how likable he was. The bank's fraud detection was doing what it was built to do. Mark ran a hand through his hair, rough. This is bad, he muttered. This is really bad. He looked at me again, eyes narrowing. Fix it. I blinked once. Fix what? Call them, he said, stepping toward me. Tell them it's fine. Tell them you authorized it. Tell them you opened it. Tell them whatever you need to tell them. I stared at him. And in that moment, I felt something inside me snap cleanly in half, like a rope finally breaking. Not my heart. My illusion. The last shred of the man I thought I married. You want me to lie for you, I said softly. It's not lying, he hissed. It's smoothing it over. It's protecting us. That is crafted. Us. I repeated again. You keep saying that word. Mark's phone rang again. He answered without looking. This time, the voice on the other end was male, formal, not Lauren, not Gavin, someone from the rental platform's trust and safety team, asking to confirm identity, asking about device disclosures, asking to speak with the property owner. Mark's mouth opened, then closed. He couldn't answer because he wasn't the owner, not legally. He looked at me, eyes wide, and shoved the phone toward me. Talk, he whispered harshly. Tell them it's fine. I didn't take the phone. The man on the line said, Hello, ma'am? Is this Emily Carter? Mark's hand trembled as he held it out. I let him hold it. I let the question hang in the air like a bell. Then I said, clear and calm, Yes, this is Emily. Mark's shoulders sagged with relief. For half a second, he believed I was going to save him. I continued, I am the property owner. I did not authorize any hidden recording devices. I did not authorize co-host access to anyone named Lauren Pierce. I need this report documented. I'm also concerned my identity was used to open accounts without my consent. Mark made a strangled sound, like a cough that turned into disbelief. He grabbed for the phone, but I stepped back. I kept speaking. Steady, factual, not emotional. The man on the phone asked me to confirm my email and said the listing would remain frozen pending investigation. He said their team would need photographs of any devices, complaint logs, and access history. He said law enforcement may be contacted depending on findings. I ended the call and set my own phone down on the counter, hands still steady. Mark stared at me as if I'd just walked out of my own body and someone else was wearing my face. I told the truth, I said. He lunged toward me then. Not to hit me, but to grab my arm. To grab control. his fingers wrapped around my wrist. Tight. Instinct made me pull back, and the old bruise from the hospital band flared with pain. "Don't," I said sharply, and my voice cut through the room like a blade. He froze. His grip loosened. He stepped back, breathing hard. For a second, we stood there in silence, the house around us too normal for what was happening inside it. Then Mark's phone buzzed again, and this time he didn't even look. He knew. He knew it was falling apart. He sank onto the couch, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. "You're destroying me," he said, voice muffled. I looked at him, and I felt something I didn't expect. Grief. Not for him. For the time I'd wasted believing his kindness was real. For the cabin my aunt loved. For the strangers who thought they were safe. For the version of myself who would have begged him to choose me. Who would have tried to fix what he broke. "I'm not destroying you," I said quietly. "You built this. You just assumed I'd carry it for you." He lifted his head, eyes red, but not from tears. From rage. "You think you're so righteous," he spat. "You think you're a hero. You're going to bring Gavin down too? You're going to go after everyone? You don't know what you're touching." There it was, the final threat. The admission that bigger people were involved. I nodded slowly. "Maybe I don't," I said. Mark stared at me for a long moment. Then his face shifted into something like desperation. "If you tell them everything," he said, voice lower now, "they'll come for you too. You're the owner. You're the one on the deed." I held his gaze. "That's why I documented everything," I said. "That's why I locked down my identity. That's why I didn't confront you until I had proof." His mouth opened slightly, and I saw the moment he realized what I'd been doing while he thought I was resting. "You've known," he whispered. "I've known since the day I came home early," I said. His eyes widened. "You saw." "I heard enough," I said, and kept my voice steady. "And I watched you lie to my face afterward like it was nothing." Mark's shoulders sagged again. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, not because he'd changed physically, but because his power had drained out of him. He was a man who'd relied on my trust like it was a resource, and now it was gone. I walked to the hallway closet, opened it, and pulled out the file box. I carried it into the living room and set it on the coffee table between us. Mark stared at it like it was a coffin. "I'm leaving," I said. "Not because I'm scared, because I'm done." "No, Emily," he said, voice cracking. "Please, we can fix this." I shook my head slowly. "You don't fix forged signatures," I said. "You don't fix hidden cameras. You don't fix a man who asks his wife to lie so he can keep his money." I picked up my purse, the one I'd quietly packed days earlier, and walked toward the front door. My chest hurt, but my hands didn't shake. Mark followed me into the entryway, his voice rising, desperate now. "If you walk out, you'll ruin everything." I turned back one last time and looked at him. Really looked. "You already ruined it," I said. I opened the door and stepped outside into the late afternoon light. The air was cold and clean. The neighborhood looked the same as it always did: lawns, mailboxes, kids' bikes in driveways, like the world didn't care about the private disasters behind closed doors. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed with a new email notification from Claire. The subject line was simple: filing. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I knew what it meant. Mark was still standing in the doorway when I backed out of the driveway. He looked like a man watching a storm roll in from the horizon, realizing too late that the house he built wasn't built to withstand it. And as I drove away, I understood the final twist of all of it, the part that made my throat tighten with something like bitter laughter. Mark had spent months creating a paper version of me he could use and blame. But the moment the system flagged fraud and the platform demanded the real owner, the only person who could speak with authority was the woman he'd been lying to. Me. He didn't lose everything because I screamed or fought or begged. He lost everything because I finally stopped carrying his lies, and the truth did exactly what it was always going to do. It collapsed the world he thought was solid.